Diogenes, the cynic, Diogenes of Sinope, who was around for about not very long really. 412 to 323. Actually, that is quite old. He was a contemporary of Plato, and Plato called him Socrates gone mad. But there's a lot in common that he's got with Socrates. Socrates believed, or at least Plato records Socrates as believing that sometimes we need a shock in order to see the truth. Plato's idea of a shock was placing a dead fish on somebody's forehead. It was a dead fish or a torpedo, which had which was an electric fish. It was often used in childbirth as some form of anaesthetic. But he thought, give people a shock. Well, Diogenes definitely did that. He was definitive, definitive indubiety. He was a person who was caught in what I suppose euphemistically would be called a public display of indecency, outraging public decency, going beyond. What was it, Remington or somebody recently about 2006? What exactly would be the problems of nudity in public and indecent activity in public, going beyond the susceptibilities or even shocking reasonable people? Well, Diogenes definitely did that, and when he was caught in this onanistic clinch, he said, well, I wish it was easy to get rid of my feelings of hunger by rubbing my belly. But he is responsible for two things which we use today on a regular basis. Number one, he said that people ask, where do you come from? He says that he was a cosmopolitan. He's the first person to use that idea. And number two, he talked relentlessly about parousia, that is, free speech. When he met Alexander the Great, he said, Alexander the Great said, what can I do for you? And he said, get out of my sunlight. And Alexander the Great had said if he were not Alexander the Great, he would like to be Diogenes. Diogenes wanted a simple life, which might have gone beyond custom and convention. And he wanted to get rid of the trappings of civilization which had got in the way of truth. And from that point of view, I can see very, very well how Plato would see him as being a version of Socrates. He didn't like Plato, of course. Plato had said that human beings were bipedal animals without feathers, so he plucked a bird and said, look, I've got you, Plato's man. And he's an interesting man looking through a pile of bones, another Alexander the Great story, which suggests probably Alexander the Great and Diogenes never met at all. When you get too many stories, you start to question whether any of them are true. And he was looking through these bones, and Alexander the Great said, what are you doing? He said, I'm trying to distinguish between the bones of your father, King Philip of Macedon, and the bones of a slave. And he was called an old dog, and he would go through Athens with a little lamp, and people say, what are you doing? He says, I'm looking for a human being. Well, I don't know where he got the money to buy the oil to light the lamp. So I think again that's a little bit unlikely, and I think he's a victim of his own stories. But the idea that wisdom and happiness belong to independence, I think, is perfectly agreeable. Does independence mean eccentricity? I suppose in principle, yes. To be out of the circle, out of the rat race. And he is he is an extraordinary example of somebody who rejected the system. But he's not the only one. There are so many of the Diogenes characters turning up in history, of whom I suppose Francis of Assisi is a really good example. Even to a certain extent, the Buddha, Siddhartha, people who reject the norms of society to try to find some underlying principle of goodness. And I think also in many ways the monastic vocation is the vocation of Diogenes, though I trust most monks will not be accused of public indecency. And an ability to see society from outside, that I think is the mission of any artist and any entertainer. Diogenes lies within us all.